Ezra was 7 after these things, and of course these things are the contents of Ezra 1 through 6, which were about the rebuilding and rededication of the temple. We read that last time, and we also read the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, who were factored into that. And that was in the 5 teens. They started coming back to the land in 538 BC. Haggai and Zechariah began their ministries in 520 BC to get them to rebuild the temple, which they did in 4 years, and dedicated it sometime in March of 515 BC, according to our calendars. So that was in 515 BC. That's where Ezra 6 ended. So Ezra 7 begins after these things. During the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia. Now this is not the guy from Esther. That guy's name was Xerxes. The Greek form of his name, at least, was Xerxes. This is his son, Artaxerxes. This is probably the son of that Vashti woman that we read about briefly in Esther, or maybe some other woman. Not Esther's son. Esther did not have a son that became king. In the historical documents, the woman who gave birth to Artaxerxes is called Amestris. And she may have been Vashti. Vashti can very well have not even been a name. It's just a title that means beauty. Or it could have been a very early wife of Xerxes that he replaced with Esther first and then later on with some other woman. At any rate, Esther apparently fell out of favor with Xerxes sometime after the book of Esther, and the woman who ended up bearing the children, the son that would become his successor, Artaxerxes, was someone else, a lady named Amestris. But this is Artaxerxes. This is Xerxes' son. Xerxes, the guy who was there in the book of Esther, reigned from 486 to 465 BC, and he was eventually assassinated by one of his stewards. And so now his son has taken over. His son had a long reign, going down from the 465 BC to 424 BC. So he reigned for 40 years. And this is during the beginning of his reign. This is in the 450. This is in, according to our calendars, 458 BC. We have it dated as. So after these things, and after the book of Esther, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia. Again, I tend to think Malachi the prophet came along, during this time before Ezra came, but I don't know. He may have been sometime later. Malachi, Ezra, and Nehemiah all overlap to some degree or another. So anyway, after these things, after Ezra 1 through 6, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok. These are some of the big names of the priests. Hilkiah was the guy who was high priest in Josiah's day. Zadok was the priest of Solomon's day. Son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Marioth, son of Zerahiah, son of Uzi, son of Buki, son of Abishua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest. So he goes all the way back. He is a thoroughly qualified member of the high priestly line. Now, this is not a complete genealogy, okay? There's a lot of names here. Right, but Aaron lived 1,000 years before Ezra. Actually, more like 1,100 years before Ezra. Okay, these names, there's a lot of them here, but they don't cross 1,100 years of time. So this is a selective list, but but it shows you Ezra's criteria to be a priestly reformer. The genealogies of the Old Testament are not, or the New Testament for that matter, are not meant to be taken exhaustively. Okay. This is one of the reasons why we cannot date the age of the earth based on the Bible's genealogy, because the genealogies are not comprehensive and are not complete. Going all the way back to the beginning of Genesis, all those names that we read about at the beginning of Genesis are not complete, are not comprehensive, and they do not intend to be. The son of Aaron, the chief priest, this Ezra, came up from Babylon. So he had been in Babylon. I presume he had lived there. I don't know if he had visited Jerusalem at some point prior to this and came back now from Babylon to dwell there permanently. I don't know. But he was in Babylon, and now he's going to Jerusalem. And apparently he's there to stay. Apparently he's going to Jerusalem for the sake of staying there. We don't read there's no indication that he left and went back to Babylon at any point after this. This Ezra came up from Babylon. He was a teacher well versed in the law of Moses. which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. Some of the Israelites, including priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, and temple servants, also came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes became king in 465 BC, so according to our calendars, this is the year 458 BC. Ezra arrived in Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. He had begun his journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month, and he arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month. It took him 4 months to get there. That's actually pretty quick, and it says here, for the gracious hand of his God was on him. That was a pretty quick journey. 4 months was a faster than usual trip because God's hand was on him. For Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord, and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. So that's what he's going there for. He is going there to teach the law of Moses to the people in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Judah. I don't know how he knew the conditions of Jerusalem and Judah, whether he had been there previously and came back with a full, army of people and treasures. I don't know. And we'll read about in Nehemiah that he gets word from his brother about what's going on in Jerusalem. And that's how he knows about the conditions there. I don't know how Ezra knew. We don't read about that. But somehow or another he knew that spiritual conditions in Israel were not good. And he felt the hand of God on him to go and do something about it. He's going to go there to teach the decrees and laws of the Lord in Israel. And he has official authority from the king of Persia to do this, as we read about here. This is a copy of the letter King Artaxerxes had given to Ezra the priest and teacher, a man learned in matters concerning the commands and decrees of the Lord for Israel. So he has official kingly permission to come here and do this. And here it is. Artaxerxes, King of Kings, to Ezra the priest, a teacher of the law of the God of heaven. That's a Persian title for God. Greetings. Now the Persians did not have any difficulty whatsoever believing in gods. Okay, we've been seeing this all the way back since Cyrus. All right, they wanted help from any place they could get it. Okay, they were not about to spurn the assistance or blessings of any god, of any of the peoples that they were ruling over. This does not mean that Artaxerxes was a believer or a follower of Ezra's God. I mean, I'm sure he believed in the existence of Ezra's God, as he believed in the existence of all these gods. But he does not want to make an enemy of Ezra's God. So just like way back when they first came into this area and conquered Babylon, and they released the Jews and all the other captive peoples they inherited from Babylon, and told them to go back to their lands and build their temples and resume their lifestyles, but pray to the gods, your gods, for the king and his sons. Right? They were willing to get help anywhere they could get it from. Now this is different from how the Greeks will be later on. The Greeks will want you to worship the Greek system. Okay? That's where the problems are going to come in with the Greek. Now we don't read about that in the Old Testament. We read a preview of that in the book of Daniel, who prophesied about those things, in Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 and 11. But the Greeks are not going to be as open-minded as the Persians. They're going to want you to follow the Greek way of living. But the Persians were a pretty open-minded, tolerant people. They had no difficulty allowing the people to do pretty much whatever they wanted, as long as they swore fealty and paid tribute to the king of Persia. So greetings. Now this is the king's letter again. By the way, this letter is written in Aramaic, the language of the day. Now I decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including priests and Levites, who wish to go to Jerusalem with you, may go. They are already set free when Cyrus came along 80 years earlier. So now he's giving them further incentives to go back to Jerusalem, if they haven't already. You are sent by the king and his 7 advisors. There's that idea of the 7 advisors again. I read about that in the book of Esther. The Persian kings had 7 advisors. I don't know if these advisors came from the 7 aristocratic families, or if it was just they just did everything by 7s. I don't know. The 7 advisors, one advisor from each family, or I don't know. But at any rate, there is this idea of this council of 7. You are sent by the king and his 7 advisors to inquire about Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God, which is in your hand. Moreover, you are to take with you the silver and gold the king and his advisors have freely given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, together with all the silver and gold you may obtain from the province of Babylon, as well as the free will offerings of the people and priests to the temple of their God in Jerusalem. So the king himself had given Ezra some kind of offering to be brought to the temple of Israel's God in Jerusalem. And that, he told them also to get materials from Babylon. Their capital wasn't in Babylon. We read about that in Esther. He was in Susa. We're going to read in Nehemiah again that they're in Susa. So their capital wasn't in Babylon any longer. But he was given money, an offering straight from the king, wherever the king was, and he was going to get an offering from Babylon, whoever was in charge of Babylon, plus the people who were in Jerusalem itself. With this money, be sure to buy bulls, rams, and male lambs, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, and sacrifice them on the altar of the temple of your God in Jerusalem. You and your brother Jews may then do whatever seems best with the rest of the silver and gold, in accordance to the will of your God. Deliver to the God of Jerusalem all the articles entrusted to you for worship in the temple of your God. I don't know what this is exactly, because they already brought the temple items back with them. Nebuchadnezzar took them with him into Babylon and put them in his treasury, and Belshazzar brought them out and used them in his last banquet. Right about that in Daniel 5. And then when they went back, when Cyrus set them free, he gave them permission to take those items back with them, back to Jerusalem. So I don't know what this is. Like the articles and artifacts that were used in the temple worship system were already brought back. So I'm not sure what they're talking about here. So deliver to the God of Jerusalem all the articles entrusted to you for worship in the temple of your God. And anything else needed for the temple of your God that you may have occasion to supply, you may provide from the royal treasury. Now I, King Artaxerxes, order all the treasuries of Trans-Euphrates, that's the region beyond the river, west of the Euphrates, to provide with diligence whatever Ezra the priest, a teacher of the law of the God of heaven, may ask you, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of olive oil, and salt without limit. So they didn't have to give Ezra everything. There was a limit to how much Ezra could ask them for, except for salt, I guess. But they were told to give Ezra up to this amount if he asked for it. Whatever the God of heaven has prescribed, let it be done with diligence for the temple of the God of heaven. Why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and of his sons? We read about that in the letter that Darius. Remember, when they were trying to get the temple built, there was a king named Darius the Persian, Darius the First, who was the guy they appealed to for official authority, and he gave it to them. And this is in Ezra 6. He gave it to them in a letter saying, "Go ahead and build that temple." And he said in chapter 6, verse 10. So that that's verse 9, and whatever is needed, give to them without fail, so that they, the priests, may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven, and pray for the well-being of the king and his sons. So he was willing to get, these kings of Persia were willing to get help from wherever they could get it from. If they got it from the Jewish God, they would get it from the Jewish God. They didn't have a problem with that. And for the most part, the Jews got along with the Persians just fine. We read about the Persians ruled for about 200 years. Cyrus conquered Babylon in 538 BC, and Alexander the Great came and conquered Persia in the 330s BC. So the Persians ruled for about 200 years, and for the most part, the Jews got along just fine with them. To such a degree that in the second half of that time period, from 430 to 330 BC or so, we don't hear anything about it at all. We don't hear anything from that period of time. When Alexander the Great did come to the area to fight the Persians, the Jews were initially reluctant because they were allies of Persia. So they got along with Persia just fine. Whatever the God of heaven has prescribed, let it be done with diligence to the temple of the God of heaven. Why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and of his sons? You are also to know that you have no authority to impose taxes, tribute, or duty on any of the priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, temple servants, or other workers of the house of God. So they were not allowed to tax the religious personnel. And this was not, by the way, a special favor just for the Jews. This was a common Persian policy. You did not extract taxes from the priests or the priestly tribes or clans. And you, Ezra, and according to the wisdom of your God, which you possess. So the king apparently knew Ezra personally, somehow or another. We know how the king knew Nehemiah. Okay, we'll read about that in Nehemiah. We know how they were acquainted, but somehow or another, the king also knew Ezra. We don't know that. We don't know how he knew Ezra, but he did. And you, Ezra, in accordance to the wisdom of your God, which you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to administer justice to all the people of the region beyond the river, all who know the laws of your God. And you are to teach any who do not know them. Whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must surely be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment. That's the letter. This is Ezra now speaking again. Actually, we haven't found out for certain. Ezra up to now hasn't identified himself as the speaker, but now Ezra's going to be speaking. Praise be to the Lord, the God of our fathers, who has put it into the king's heart to bring honor to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem in this way, and who has extended his good favor to me, Ezra, before the king and his advisors and all the king's powerful officials. Because the hand of my Lord my God was on me, I took courage and gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. Before we go any further, we have to set a little bit of context here for this and the book of Nehemiah. This is in Artaxerxes' reign, pretty close to the beginning. He had a 40-year reign. This is year 7. It's during this time frame. Okay, so Persia comes and conquers Babylon at 539 BC. And then Cyrus dies in 530 BC, and his son Cambyses conquers Egypt in 525 BC. From 525 BC onward, Egypt was in a state of just ongoing rebellion. They did not like being conquered. Egypt had been a proud, powerful, independent nation for 2,000 years already at this point, and they did not like being subjugated by foreigners. So there was a constant state of unrest in Egypt. Plus, the Persians picked a fight with Greece. Okay, so before Cyrus went to Babylon, he went north into the area that we now call Turkey and conquered that area. That was before his excursions into Babylon. And by doing so, he claimed a handful of Greek city-states that were in that area. So that brought the Persians into contact and conflict with the Greeks. And that was back in the 540s BC. And so for the next couple hundred years, the Persians and the Greeks are going to be at each other in some way or another, off and on. The guy who was the Persian king when the temple was built, Darius, wanted to fight the Greeks. Xerxes, the guy who was king in Esther's time, wanted to fight the Greeks. In fact, that banquet we read about at the beginning of Esther is probably more like an exhibit showing off his strength to his military leaders to get them ready to go fight Greece, which they would do after that banquet was over. And then it was after he came back from that, after losing, that he wanted to have comfort in his women, his harem, and he couldn't have Vashti anymore because he banished her beforehand, so they had to go get Esther. They had to go find some other girl. And during the time he went off to go fight Greece, and then he lost and had to come back, and he took comfort in his women, basically. So they were fighting Greece, and it was during this time, and then Greece has been infiltrating Egypt in order to stir up Egypt against Persia. So the Athenians in particular were the ones doing that, Athens, of course, being from Greece. And so there was a lot of conflict going on. Persia was never completely able to subjugate Greece. And Greece is fighting back here, the Athenians are at least, by infiltrating into Egypt and stirring up the Egyptians to fight Persia from Egypt. So now Persia has to deal with Greek fighting in the southern coast of Europe and in the islands of the Mediterranean Sea, as well as from Egypt. Now, Israel is between Egypt and Persia. So, and as well, this is a very important land route to get from Egypt to anywhere else in that area. That's why Egypt wanted to control this area so badly. we read about that. We've been reading about that all of the Old Testament. Who control. That's why Israel was put here. I mean, God put Israel in this spot specifically so that it would come into contact with nations all around it, and they could then shine His light in the darkness to the nations living around them. That's exactly why they were here. They were in a very favorable spot. They're at the nexus of a lot of crossroads of travel. To get from Egypt to anywhere else in that area, you pretty much had to go through Israel, the land that was Israel. And God did it on purpose. He put them there on purpose. So Persia wants to control the fighting in Egypt, wants to minimize get rid of the rebellion, minimize the damage done by there. So he wants a strong ally in this area that is the Promised Land, Israel, Judah, and he can get it through these Jews. If he can win over Ezra and Nehemiah and get them installed as strong leaders in Jerusalem, then he can have a powerful ally in that region, which will go a long way towards stabilizing Persian control over that region. We're reading about that in particular in the book of Nehemiah. So that's what Artaxerxes is motivated. He's not, he might like me. I don't know what his relationship is with Ezra. Okay? I know what his relationship is with Nehemiah. We're going to read about that in the book of Nehemiah. He might have personal fondness towards the man. He might like him. He might admire him. He might respect him. Okay? He probably does, at least to some degree. As much as a king can, as much as a king, an all-powerful potentate can have admiration for a subject, he probably does. I don't know about Ezra, but it's less about wanting to benefit them in particular, even their people in particular, more about I want a strong ally in that region that I can count on to help me deal with any potential revolts that might be coming in that area or from that direction. So that is ultimately what Artaxerxes is motivated here by. He wants to establish a strong, and that will ultimately work. Like I said, as far as I can tell, historically, the Jews and the Persians got along very well. And when Alexander the Great came and fought in that area to fight the Persians in the 330s BC, the Jews didn't want to fight him because they were so strongly allied with Persia. Alexander the Great did not end up fighting them. They pacified him by showing him the prophecies in Daniel that predicted his conquest of the region, but they didn't want to fight him either because they were such strong Persian allies. So they didn't. So this worked. Like this cooperation that they had here, which dates back to these Persian kings that they associated with in this time, worked and benefited both parties pretty well for a couple hundred years. Okay.